Do you recognize this face? Well, that's the problem. No one seems to. Their identity is a mystery, and each detail about them only raises more questions, and yet you may hold the key. There are people out there who remember this person. They just don't know where they went or what happened to them. The story of Asian Doe began in December of 2010 when the police found the bodies of 4 women in these bushes near Gilgo Beach. The discovery of the Gilgo 4 made it obvious that an unknown serial killer had been operating in the area. He had removed his victims' clothes, wrapped them in camouflage burlap, and then dumped their remains in the thick brambles at the side of Ocean Parkway. Unfortunately, this discovery was just the beginning of what can only be described as a nightmare.
As you mentioned, this afternoon the police found 3 more bodies. This brings the count to 8. They don't really know.
And the area where they are searching right now, Nancy, is very thick brush. What they're going is they're
right
looking
here in the area where they found 3 new bodies. That's right, 3 new bodies, more bodies
Investigators unearthed 4, possibly 5 more bodies on that same strip.
When spring rolled around, the police expanded their search across the island. On March 29, 2011, they discovered the partial remains of Jessica Taylor at this section of the highway. 6 days later, the victim count rose even higher. In the brush opposite Cedar Beach, they found the partial remains of Valerie Mack and the body of an unidentified female toddler. On that same day, they made another discovery, a skeleton near the original site. The killer had dumped the skeleton in the bushes between the Gilgo 4 and Taylor. Unlike the other victims, this one was fully clothed. But that wasn't the only difference that set them apart. The rest of the Gilgo Beach victims were all female. This skeleton, however, belonged to a male. Initially, the authorities said that the unidentified victim was an Asian male.
The unidentified Asian male, who was estimated to be between the ages of 17 and 23 years old at the time of his death.
In 2024, it was announced that he was likely of Southern Han Chinese descent.
Now, it was previously known that this victim was of Asian descent. However, now we know that it is a strong likelihood that the victim is of Southern Chinese descent, Han Chinese descent.
However, that doesn't necessarily mean that he was from China. At the time of his disappearance, there were more than 2.4 million Chinese Americans living in the United States. New York City also has the largest Chinese population outside of Asia. For all we know, he was born and raised in the US. Unfortunately, his ancestry doesn't really narrow things down. 91% of the population of China is Han Chinese. Furthermore, the population of southern China is vast. For example, there are more than 100 million people living in the Guangdong province alone. Genetics can tell us a lot about a person's ancestors. Unfortunately, it can't tell us who they were, how they lived, or where they called home. He may have been an immigrant, a native New Yorker, or someone who moved to the area from another part of the country. What we do know is that he likely isn't present in any official missing persons database. However, that does not mean that he isn't missed by someone. He may have family members out there who stop for a moment and wonder where he went. Former friends, classmates, and work colleagues might suddenly remember him from time to time. They might even search for his name on social media, only to learn that he has no online presence.
Prior to 2006, this person had friends, possible classmates, or co-workers, and a family. Someone knows who this individual is.
In this case, there is a metaphorical door. The people who knew him are standing on one side, while we, the general public, are on the other. For Asian Doe to get his name back, someone from either side will need to unlock that door and make the connection. And that could be you.
person had a spot and would pull up on the side of the highway, carry the body across the brambles, through the thick briars.
We're confident that the killer pulled up his vehicle right alongside onto the shoulder of the road as close as he could to the thicket bramble, and removed the body from his vehicle and tossed the body as far as he could into the bramble.
Asian Doe is believed to have been murdered in 2006 or before. When the police discovered his skeleton in 2011, it had been exposed to the elements for at least 5 years. The victim was estimated to be between 17 and 23 years old, standing between 5'3" and 5'9". Today, his former classmates would likely be in their late 30s to mid-40s. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head. Artist Danielle Grutadoria, who worked on the first forensic sketch of the victim, said that the skull was intact, but that many of the bones were out of place. As a result, it took her nearly 1 month to compose a sketch of his face. Unfortunately, sketches of skeletal remains can be very hit or miss, as the artist needs to fill in the gaps using their imagination. Lips and noses, for example, are very difficult, as they don't leave behind any skeletal traces of their shape. The police released sketches of Gilgo Beach victims Karen Vergata and Valerie Mack prior to their identification. And as you can see, those sketches weren't entirely accurate. However, that is not Grutadoria's fault. The goal of forensic artists is to create a general likeness that might jog someone's memory. We can't expect them to create an exact portrait from a skull. This means that we can't exclude someone on the basis that they don't look exactly like the person in these images. It was previously noted that the victim may have had a musculoskeletal disorder that affected how he walked. These types of disorders can be caused by poor posture, repetitive movements, lifting heavy objects, poor nutrition, and remaining in a static position for too long. It is unknown whether people would have noticed anything different about his walk, as that would have depended on the severity of his condition. The medical examiner also said that Asian Doe had lost a front tooth, a bottom molar, and a top molar at some point prior to his death. Experts can tell whether a tooth was lost prior to death by looking at the bone around the tooth socket. In this case, the sockets must have shown signs of healing. There are a number of reasons why he may have lost these teeth, such as poor dental health, genetic conditions, malnutrition, or substance abuse. People who knew him might not have noticed that he was missing teeth. A partial denture can easily conceal a missing front tooth, while the molars would have been mostly out of sight, as they are located at the back of the mouth. As you can see, each clue about this victim raises multiple possibilities. Therefore, we must remain completely open-minded. Up until now, I have withheld certain details about the victim's lifestyle. You see, there is a side to Asian Doe that he may have kept hidden from those who knew him. There is a danger that they might see these details and immediately assume that he isn't the same person they lost touch with. Therefore, some pretext is needed. A person's life can change dramatically depending on the cards that they are dealt, and each small decision can lead us down an entirely different path. This would have been especially true for a young person like Asian Doe, as he would have been traversing the emotional pitfalls and obstacles of early adulthood. Sadly, for many, this is the period when it all seems to go wrong. So far, every identified victim of the Gilgo Beach serial killer has been a sex worker. The earlier victims worked on the streets, while the later victims advertised online. Given the killer's behavior, there is a strong chance that Asian Doe was also a sex worker. For how long, we don't know. Considering his estimated age, he may have been relatively new to the industry. If you do have someone from your past in mind, then don't be so quick to discount them, as many people in the sex industry hide their work from their friends and family. They might even pretend to have a steady job in a different industry. For example, the first known Gilgo Beach serial killer victim, Sandra Costilla, told friends that she was traveling into Manhattan to work for a print company. In reality, she hadn't worked there for over a year. There are a number of factors that may have forced Asian Doe down this path, such as trafficking, poverty, addiction, financial debts, coercion, and peer pressure. It is unclear whether he worked on the streets or advertised online. Between 1996 and 2003, it appears as though the killer found his victims by driving around the red light districts of Manhattan. However, by 2007, he had changed his MO. Instead of picking up girls off the street, he was now searching for escorts on websites such as Craigslist and then contacting them using cheap, disposable burner phones. This change may have been born out of necessity, as police pressure during the 2000s was forcing many sex workers to move indoors. The mid-2000s saw the emergence of faster internet speeds, social networks, 3G, and smartphones. It was a time when many industries were setting up an online presence. The sex industry was no different, as many girls began advertising their services on websites such as Craigslist. They no longer had to stand outside in the cold and risk being arrested. They could now look for customers from the comfort of their own home or a hotel room. Of course, this transition didn't just happen overnight, as many sex workers were hesitant to change. This led to a situation where some girls worked the street while others worked online. If Asian Doe went missing in 2006 or just before, then he could have fallen into either category. However, if I were forced to take a guess, then I would say that he was likely an online escort.
Some of the bodies were dismembered, so dismemberment was part of the signature of the killer. This killer, by the way, was very careful in covering his tracks. He didn't use his own cell phone. The skeletal remains of the Asian male, the artist reproduced this picture of what this person would look like. He wasn't in the database, no DNA in our database.
The earlier victims were dismembered. Their skulls and hands were thrown into the bushes along Ocean Parkway, while the rest of the remains were dumped at various locations across Long Island. The later victims were not dismembered. Instead, they were left intact in the same general area. This change in MO may have been driven by one key factor: exposure. During the 1990s and early 2000s, the killer had to approach sex workers on the street. This put him in a precarious position. Like most serial killers who target sex workers, he would have been a frequent visitor to red light districts. So much so that some of the girls in these areas may have been familiar with him and his vehicle. To lower his risk, it appears as though he decided to conceal his victims' identities. If a victim is missing their head and hands, then the police can't identify them through dental records or fingerprints. And if they can't determine the victim's name, then they can't trace their last known movements and speak to anyone who may have witnessed the pickup. During the mid-2000s, the landscape began to change. The shift to online advertising meant that he no longer had to hunt for victims in public. Instead, he could browse Craigslist, contact targets with a burner phone, and then pick them up in a nondescript location. If you break it down, you'll notice a pattern. The dismembered victims worked on the streets, while the Gilgo 4 advertised online. Asian Doe was not dismembered, which may indicate that the killer didn't feel exposed during the pickup. In other words, the killer may have found him online. It is important to note that this is just a personal theory of mine. I may be 100% wrong, as there could have been other driving factors behind his change in MO. Unlike the other victims, Asian Doe was found wearing clothes. But that wasn't the most surprising part. The most striking detail was that they were women's clothing. This has led to two prevailing theories. One, that Asian Doe identified as a woman, or two, that he was a gay man who practiced cross-dressing. If this was a regular case, then I would agree that it must be either of those two options. However, this is not a regular case. Asian Doe's lifestyle adds an extra layer of complexity that most people aren't aware of. When an escort meets with a client, they are providing a service in exchange for money. Factors such as intimacy, pleasure, and physical attraction don't play a role in this exchange. In their minds, it is just a transaction. They may even disassociate during the act. This may surprise you, but many straight men in the sex industry do cater to male clients. In the past, this was sometimes referred to as gay for pay. In essence, if they can overcome the physical aversion, then it is an easy way to make more money, as there are far more male clients than female clients. When it comes to Asian Doe, there are four possibilities. 1. They were trans and identified as a woman. 2. He was a gay man who practiced cross-dressing. 3. He was a gay man who only engaged in cross-dressing while he was meeting clients. 4. He was a straight man who serviced male clients. As you can see, this isn't a simple case of A or B. Depending on his circumstances, there are many possibilities. Therefore, we need to remain open-minded about who this person may have been.
This person certainly had a life and loved ones and friends who knew them by their name. The victim was between the ages of 17 and 23. So there he was a teenager or very young adult when the murder occurred. Asian Doe was wearing exclusively women's clothing. He was
In 2024, the authorities published images of the labels that were found on Asian Doe's clothing. The victim was dressed in a Raffaella brand shirt, a blue-ribbed short-sleeve chrysanthemum top with a crew neck, and the Bill Blass pants and a bra. Photographs of the clothes have not been released. The labels show materials such as rayon, linen, and cotton, which are biodegradable. The victim was lying in a saltwater marsh area for at least 5 years. The damp soil, wind, salt water, UV rays, and the decomposition of the victim's remains would have all combined to break down and discolor the material. In the photographs, you can see that the surrounding material is badly damaged. Despite the limited photos, I was able to glean some information from the labels. For instance, the RN numbers tell us that these clothes were likely sold in America, as RN numbers are issued by the FTC. The chrysanthemum shirt was sold at the Dress Barn, a mid-tier clothing chain that had over 700 locations in the US. Old newspaper advertisements show that the Dress Barn was selling this brand as far back as 1988. The Made in Taiwan ROC text is interesting, as Taiwan began to phase out the ROC reference in the 1990s. During my research, I managed to track down a number of vintage clothing items that share the exact same label. One was a moss green top, One was pink, and the other was a long-sleeved black top. Although they slightly differ, they are clearly versions of the same style. While this shirt may have been produced in the early 2000s, it doesn't necessarily mean that Asian Doe died in that period. For example, he may have purchased it years prior or picked it up at a discount store. Note that all of this information was sent to the relevant authorities back in January. Although I can confirm that they received the images, I cannot say whether the tops were a match or not. Obviously, this is an ongoing investigation, so I'm not expecting any confirmation on the matter. All I know is that the information is in the right hands. In 2024, Suffolk County DA Raymond Tierney said that Asian Doe may have spent some time in New York City. Tierney refused to elaborate. However, his comment isn't surprising, as 6 of the first 8 victims were likely picked up in Manhattan. The killer also made several phone calls from the area. Although Asian Doe may have been picked up in Manhattan, it doesn't necessarily mean that he was originally from the city. For example, Melissa Bartholomew came from Buffalo, lived in the Bronx, and worked in Manhattan, while Jessica Taylor moved between multiple cities on the East Coast. Asian Doe may have been living in Manhattan, or he may have been making regular trips to the city from somewhere else. Unfortunately, we just don't know. Asian Doe's biological sex and clothing weren't the only things that made him unique. The other victims had been asphyxiated, while he had died from blunt force trauma. The initial theory among detectives was that he had kept his biological sex a secret and that the killer beat him to death in a violent rage when he learned the truth. However, that theory became less likely in 2023.
We have breaking news out of Long Island, New York.
The suspect has been taken into custody in New York in an
Tonight, a 59-year-old architect, a father of 2, is now under arrest.
In July of 2023, the authorities charged a Long Island resident named Rex Heuermann with 3 of the Gilgo 4 murders. Heuermann, who worked as an architect in Manhattan, was also later indicted for 4 of the other Gilgo Beach murders. Following his arrest, it was revealed that he had searched for a wide range of topics relating to escorts and torture. Among these searches were references to trans escorts and homosexual Asian men. These searches show that Heuermann has a broad range of interests that go beyond adult women, and many of these interests align with Asian Doe's suspected background. In June of 2024, prosecutors alleged that Heuermann had kept a secret Word document between 2000 and 2004. The document, which appeared to be a checklist for murder, suggested that he had converted one of the rooms in his basement into a temporary torture chamber. In the document, he allegedly wrote the following under the title "Things to Remember." Hit harder, too many hits to take down. Consider a hit to the face or neck next time for takedown. He also reminded himself to use a heavy rope for the victim's neck. If Heuermann is responsible for Asian Doe's murder, then it does raise some questions about the cause of death. It is likely that Asian Doe was significantly larger than the previous victims. Therefore, a struggle may have occurred. It is also possible that Heuermann was so acutely aware of this physical discrepancy that he overcompensated during the takedown. In other words, he may have hit the victim too hard. Of course, it is possible that the original theory was correct. Maybe Asian Doe's biological sex did catch Heuermann by surprise. Although his recent searches show an interest in trans and gay Asian men, there is a possibility that the event sparked something inside of him that caused a shift in his preferences, or evoked a desire to relive the experience. This scenario may seem less likely. However, these are complex thought processes, and we are not exactly dealing with a normal person.
workshop.
So?
I have one tool that's pretty much used in almost every job, and it's actually a cabinet maker's hammer. It is persuasive enough when I need to persuade something.
Not someone.
Something.
In this case, we have a person who likely worked in the sex industry. For whatever reason, it appears as though they weren't officially reported missing. If the victim did spend time in New York City, then there is a chance that they lived in Chinatown in Manhattan or one of the other Chinese enclaves such as Flushing, Queens or Sunset Park in Brooklyn. Asian Doe's DNA suggests ancestry from southern China, which includes Fujian. This is notable because human smuggling from Fujian was rampant during the 1990s and 2000s. Snakehead gangs, led by figures such as Sister Ping, charged migrants up to $50,000 for passage, often forcing them into debt bondage. Many ended up in exploitative labor, including the sex industry. If Asian Doe was an immigrant, then they may have arrived in the US through these channels. They could have been trapped in a cycle of debt or simply trying to survive in a foreign country with limited options. This might explain why no one has reported them missing. If the victim had no legal status, no close family in the US, or they were working under the control of a criminal network, then their disappearance may have gone unnoticed or unreported out of fear. Of course, there is also the chance that Asian Doe was born in America, lived elsewhere, and had only started living in New York shortly before their death. Perhaps they were estranged from their family. Perhaps they grew up in the foster system. Or maybe their parents passed away and there was nobody left to ask questions about their whereabouts. Unfortunately, people fall through the cracks all of the time. If you do remember an Asian person that you haven't seen since the 2000s, then look them up. Don't take other people's word for it. Look for yourself and confirm. History has shown us that many of these cases go unsolved due to a simple misunderstanding. Asian Doe might have elderly parents who hold on to the hope that he will one day show up at their doorstep. He might have relatives who received false information about his whereabouts. A small misconception could be the only thing keeping this person from getting their name back. If, for whatever reason, you do not feel comfortable contacting the authorities, then you can submit an anonymous tip by calling 1-800-220-TIPS. If you think there's a possibility that someone you knew might be Asian Doe, then don't rule it out just because they were found wearing women's clothing or because a friend once told you that they moved away. Ask around and take a look for yourself. Remember that this was a real person, not a statistic or a stereotype. They had movies that they would rewatch and foods that they hated. They laughed at inside jokes with friends and replayed certain songs. At one point, their laughter was the highlight of someone's day. When he came into this world, his mother likely held him tight, smiling and gazing down at him like they were the only two people to ever exist. Somebody said goodbye to this person for the final time, completely unaware that when they turned their back and walked away, they would never see them again. For at least 5 years, he lay alone in the overgrown bushes beside Ocean Parkway while kids his age played volleyball and chased sunsets on nearby beaches. While they talked about their plans for the future, he lay in the dirt, surrounded by thick weeds. The seasons came and went, and the days turned into months and years. On some of those days, someone, somewhere, remembered that it was his birthday. A name is more than just letters. It is a lifetime of memories. His favorite toy as a child, the one with the worn edges. The games he played with friends until the streetlights came on. The butterflies in his stomach when he saw his first crush. All of those little memories made up a life. Someone out there knows this person. If that someone is you, even if you're not sure, even if it's just a thought in the back of your mind, say something. Right now, Asian Doe is just a question mark. But they don't have to stay that way.